All right. So now we're going to connect the China shock up with this unfortunate trend that has been labeled deaths from despair. So since the Industrial Revolution, since modern innovation, modern growth has been unleashed, all we've seen is an increase in life expectancy. Everywhere growth goes in the world, life expectancy follows. So a country develops, life expectancy increases. We saw that, I think, in the very first week when we looked at the Rosling graph over time. As GDP grew, we saw these life expectancies increase. There has been a unfortunate trend in the U.S. where, for the first time, really in industrial history, we are seeing the reverse, where we see increasing mortality rates. So lower life expectancies, and this is only for whites. And essentially, the argument is this is coming from, or what the demographers think is this is coming from what's called deaths from despair. Essentially, the financial crisis in conjunction with the China shock really dealt a blow to these kind of, not rural, but kind of these like industrial towns in the Midwest and kind of like the rural South. Arnott, which is the subject of one of this week's reading, a long interview with him on Econ Talk. It's like an hour-long interview with Arnott. He categorizes this as back row America. Case and Deaton, who wrote a book, and they're kind of I don't know, they're like the economists who really brought this or found this increase in mortality and brought it to the public's attention. They wrote a book about this. They categorize this group as blue-collar aristocrats. Essentially, these are people who during kind of like the mid-20th century, had these good jobs, had these good manufacturing jobs. Those have gone away. The economic base of many of these towns has gone away, and what's come in is drugs and alcohol, and we've seen these deaths of despair. So this is a group that really gets hit hard by the China shock, and these deaths of despair are going to categorize essentially as overdoses of opioids, suicides, and then alcohol-related deaths. Those could be car crashes, or those could be like slow alcohol poisoning, people drinking themselves to death. Now, in general, outside of just that extreme outcome, which is death, there's lower mental and physical health on those measures, increased obesity, social isolation, and lowered marriage rates. Essentially, everything that you would measure as kind of like the fabric of a community, that fabric is fraying or non-existent in many of these rural places. If you've ever been to these places, it's really horrifying, actually. Okay, and I'm just connecting this to the China shock. So it's like, hey, trade's good, trade's great, trade leads to growth, but we do have extreme losers, and perhaps in the case of the China shock in the U.S., if we add up those losses maybe outweigh the gains. That's the case that Otter and Hansen and Dorn are making with the China shock, that actually, in this specific case, trade may have actually been bad for the U.S. Because the negative spillovers were so large. Okay, so let's look at this data. So here you have it. This is white non-Hispanics with a high school or less education. So this is pretty much this increase in mortality is really centered on the people. It's low educated whites, so people with a high school diploma or less. And so you can see this increase in mortality for this group, age 50 to 54. This is what's really driving the increase in mortality overall for non-Hispanic whites. Conversely, here you have the mortality rates for blacks. This is the all for non-Hispanic whites, and here you have the mortality rates for Hispanics. Here we can see is geographic distribution, and it's not going to be a perfect overlap, but here you go 2014, kind of the hot spots again. If we go back to our China shock one, let's see kind of, here's the areas most affected by the China shock. Similar pattern in here, and then out west, things just look bad. Even though these areas were not affected by the China shock, but these are extremely rural areas. But so generally, there's a close correlation between these areas hit by the China shock and these deaths of despair. Okay, so these are deaths of despair for non-Hispanic whites, age 45 to 54. This is all from Case and Deaton. Okay, so we have this we have this trade shock. We have these policies, this free trade policies that get spread throughout the 20th century. The general thought is theoretically these are going to be beneficial. Fast forward to the 21st century, they may not have been beneficial for the US. Now, these policies were beneficial for China, but they may not have been beneficial for the US due to the size of the shock and those negative externalities. All right, and so what are some potential policies? So there's lots of policies. I'm just going to touch upon tariffs because it is kind of the chosen lever of the Trump administration to kind of combat trade. But first, you're going to look at a video of kind of like this, just a fun video looking at kind of tariffs in the 20th century. And this video is explaining why are U.S. trucks, American-made trucks, so ubiquitous? Is it because they're so great, or perhaps is it because of chickens? Find out in this video next.